Look, we know the top 10's tricky. Every single year, we put together a top 10, and someone in that top 10, at least one, maybe two, they won't be ranked by season's end. Who's it going to be this year? We will find out. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. So happy to have you here with us today. And if you're watching us here on the ESPN College Football YouTube page, you probably notice a little bit of a change. That's right. We have adjusted the studio here. And we are very excited to have all these new helmet displays. We're excited to have all these helmets and these backdrops. And it just feels collegial. So if you haven't seen it, check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. You can also check us out at any time on the podcast platform of your choosing. We figured this is the right show to unveil the new studio look because it's our top 10. Monday, I gave you 25 through 11. I also gave you two rules to take into account when evaluating these teams. Rule number one, with the ACC and the SEC adding a ninth conference game, it kind of means that we're ranking football teams and not calendars, but the calendars still have to be a slight factor. Rule number two, returning production might tell you the floor of the teams we're evaluating, but it doesn't necessarily tell you the ceiling, right? Because some teams with new additions, maybe that ceiling's gone up just a little bit. And I also left you with the tease there at the end of Monday's show. I said that the team that returns arguably more snaps than anybody in America, nearly 2/3 of their snap from a year ago. They are number one in the country as far as returning production. Well, they hadn't been mentioned yet, and that team is Notre Dame. Now, they're not going to be number one on this list. Where will they fall? You'll find out in just a little bit. Here's the fact I want you carrying with you for the next, 45 minutes or so, because it might be the most important thing about the 26th season that very few people are saying out loud. Last year, two teams won at least 10 games and did not make the college football playoff. Notre Dame, of course, went 10-2. They stayed home. Texas went 10-3. They stayed home. Of course, one of those wins was in the bowl game. So in the regular season, they won 9 by the time the playoff was decided. So it's a little bit of a caveat, but we're talking about two really good teams that were on the outside looking in. Both those teams will be in this show. Both of them spent the last 8 months thinking about how close they were. And while the coaches poll has Ohio State 1 and Oregon 2 and Georgia 3rd, Texas 4th, and Notre Dame 5th, well, we'll see exactly where we have them. We'll see exactly where the defending national champion is. Maybe there's a team that's sitting at 10 that I think could very well win the whole thing, but there's a few regular season hiccups that could be in front of them because of just how difficult their schedule is. So we are very much looking forward to this. The AP poll will be released in just a few days. So we figured we'd get out in front of it. We'll find out whether or not we're right or they're right throughout the course of the season. Let's kick things off with team number 10 in our top 25. At number 10, it's the Oklahoma Sooners. So they're 10th on my board. They're 9th in the coaches poll. That one spot gap might be just the tiniest bit misleading, right? Because if you look at what they have, they return a lot of starters, 14 to be exact. That's in the top 13 nationally in returning snaps. You get your head coach back. You get your offensive coordinator back. Your defensive play callers, of course, your head coach. You're in good shape there. Your starting quarterback's back as well. And John Mateer being back for his second season as the starter, that's pretty significant because it's only the second time in the Brent Venables tenure that Oklahoma has brought back their signal caller. So 5 years at one of the biggest jobs in America. This is only the second time where they've opened camp knowing exactly who the guy is going to be. He's one of only 9 returning quarterbacks in the sport with 40 career passing touchdowns and 14 plus rushing touchdowns. He also last year had to get surgery on his throwing hand. He got hurt against Auburn there early in the season. And by every account, in Norman, he looks like he's had a great offseason. He looks healthy. He looks capable. He looks jacked up. Clearly a good offseason in the weight room. So there's a lot of things to be excited about with John Mateer, but there are a few things to fix. He threw 14 touchdowns last year and 11 interceptions. 3 of those interceptions came in the Red River loss to the Texas Longhorns. The Oklahoma Sooners offense didn't play well in that game, but that was also his first game back from that injured thumb. And if you look at how he played after the hand injury, he crossed the 200-yard passing mark just twice in the final 6 regular season games. And what I want to see from John Mateer, he doesn't need to be a hero all the time. Just manage the game, protect the football, and give it back to a defense that is likely to finish at least top 10, maybe top 5. They could very well be the best defense in college football. And if he plays that way, then Oklahoma becomes a really dangerous team that can beat you in a lot of different ways. But if he tries to do things on his own, then the schedule could very well beat this team up on the offensive side. But what carried them last year was the defense. I'm talking they were outstanding. They allowed 17 and change per game. They allowed 272 yards per game last year. Both those numbers were in the top 10. And that's how a team makes the playoff, with an offense that was at times maybe a little stop and go. And I think when you look at Ben Arbuckle's job this year, he's the offensive coordinator. He's not trying to reinvent anything. Maybe lean on the defense a little bit more and protect that defense. Lean on the run game a little bit more. Protect that defense. And they collectively as a team can take a huge step. Now, a couple things that have to improve, and people have said these out loud. The offensive line has to be better. They got to keep Mateer upright so he's not trying to manufacture miracles on every single snap. That'll also help them running the football. They also have to finish. And if you listen to what some of their players have said throughout the offseason, in all 3 of their losses, they didn't play as well down the stretch and gave up some points late. That led to them losing the game. So you got a top 10 scoring defense that needs to close things out. And I think they have a chance to do that with some of the guys that are back. Now, the running back room may be a bit unsettled, but I'm very optimistic about what this group might be collectively across the board. Now, here's the reason why they're 10th, because I believe, and I've said this before, I think Oklahoma can win the national championship. I really believe that. But in order to win the national championship, you must first get to the college football playoff, and they play arguably the toughest schedule in America. You can make the case it's the toughest in the SEC. You can make the case it's the toughest in the country. Depending on what metric you use, it's ranked 2nd by some, 3rd or 4th by others. And it starts immediately. You go to Michigan week 2. You get a road game at Georgia. You got the Red River game against Texas in Dallas there in October. And I think Oklahoma, they know exactly how thin these margins are, because last year as the 8th seed, they host a first-round game, and they lost that game after giving up a pretty impressive comeback by Alabama, who we'll get to in just a little bit. And the projections right now are not favorable as far as the win-loss total is concerned. I mean, some places are saying, 7-5, 8-4. No, I think it'll be better than that, because I think this team is that good. But the schedule is daunting. However, with 14 starters back, healthy quarterback, tons of career production, and a defense that could carry them is amazing. So I think that 7-5 number that the sports books are throwing out there, I think that's absurd, because I think this group has a chance to go the distance and potentially win the whole thing. But getting there is significant. So here's my honest position, right? Here on the record in August, on roster alone, Oklahoma might be a top 5 team. You can make that case. I think they're a whole lot better than 10th. So if Oklahoma gets in, I love their chances against anybody. I really mean that. I just can't draw the map right now to guarantee them a spot. It's not a fade by any stretch. It's just a math problem acknowledging that Oklahoma might have drawn one of the worst pieces of paper in the country. If anything, though, the defense travels, and they could very much get back to the dance. And when they get there, they're a huge problem for anyone that might be standing in their way. At number 9, it's Texas A&M. Look, they went 11-2 last year. Had a bit of a strange offseason, right? You tie a program record with 10 selections in the NFL draft, 10 players, 6 of them on the second day alone, with receiver Casey Concepcion going in the first round. And what the draft class did was kind of gut both lines of scrimmage, all in about a 3-day span. So what did Mike Elko do about it? He goes to the portal. He takes 19 players. He goes out and gets Isaiah Horton from Alabama. He gets Formby, who's going to likely slide into one of the offensive line spots. You get Ricky Gibson at corner. You get Anto Saka, who might become a game changer on the edge. So it's not a partial or patient rebuild. It's not just, promote from within. This is a reload at full speed when you still had some really good pieces. And I respect the aggression. I think it has a chance to work beautifully. And what's going to make it work is probably going to be the quarterback spot, right? Marcel Reed, he is the ultimate indicator of where this team can go. If he plays the way he's capable, national championship contender. If he plays down the level of competition, continues to have some mistakes in the red zone, maybe doesn't lean on his legs as much, then you might have a few more ups and downs. But this is a guy that's a returning starter. He's a team captain. He's played 27 games. He's got 21 starts. He's thrown for over 5,400 yards. He has 41 touchdowns against 19 picks and has gone for over 1,000 yards on the ground. He's one of only 8 returning quarterbacks in the sport with 5,000 career passing yards and 1,000 career rushing yards. And Colin Klein's not there anymore. He left to become the head coach at Kansas State, his alma mater. He was the offensive coordinator. But to keep things consistent for Marcel Reed in the offense, they promote from within. They give the keys to the car to Holman Wiggins, who was the co-coordinator last year and did a great job with the wide receivers. However, he's never called plays at the college level. I'm not concerned about it because I think Wiggins is an excellent coach. If you listen to Elko's own framing, then part of why he did what he did is that he felt last year offensively they operated in a collaborative way, which means promoting Wiggins from within will keep things consistent, maybe alter philosophically just a bit, not a ton. I love the conviction. And I do need to know, though, what a first-time play caller looks like in October in the SEC. And it's not necessarily just the offense, it's the defense, too. Now, Lyle Hemphill, he's the defensive coordinator, but we know Elko is going to be dialing things up on that side of the ball. They do have good pieces back with Mario Craver back at wide receiver. He was 1A to 1B, depending on the week, to Concepcion last year. And I think he has a chance to have an excellent season as well. The big problem is that it's really tough to replace 10 draft picks. And yeah, you got a bunch of transfers. To say it's going to be evens, it's maybe a stretch. Maybe it works out. Maybe it's better. All those things are possible, but right now it's still an unknown. The biggest unknown might be along the offensive line. And that's kind of where the math shows up. And it shows up early in the year, right? That group's got to come together, and it's got to come together quickly because it was an elite group last season. You also look at the linebacker room, and you lose a couple good pieces there, but they do have a really solid piece back in Damian Sanford, who's got 39 career games under his belt and has been very effective. Was a little banged up in the spring, but sounds like he's on pace to be back. Will likely be ready at least early in the season. If not for the opener, then at some point very early in the year. And here's the sentence that people should be a little concerned about, right? They got to play really well at home. They have to play well at home. Kyle Field is a massive advantage. And if you look at the schedule, it's one of the hardest in America, but you have an elite quarterback potentially if he lives up to his potential. You have an elite head coach. We really believe that. You have a play caller that has been brought up from within, so you have some continuity there. And you also have a supporting cast that along both lines of scrimmage is going to be a little bit of a change. So I'm betting on A&M's progress because I'm betting on Marcel Reed taking a step. I'm also betting on Mike Elko not skipping the beat with how this team performs along the offensive and defensive lines as they move throughout the season. At number 8, it's the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, this number might surprise some folks because last year they went 11-4. They go to Norman, they get a win, the first team to win on the road in the college football playoff. However, it was ugly. The last time we saw the Tide, it was really ugly. Indiana beat them 38-3. And in the second half, especially, it didn't feel that close. So this is year number 3 for Kalen DeBoer. And everyone circling Tuscaloosa, everyone talking about the state of the Tide, they're focusing on the New Year's Day result. And right now, Alabama doesn't have a starting quarterback. So for them to be 8, like, how does that make sense? What? How? Why? Well, let me walk you through it. And let's assess the quarterback situation honestly. Look, Ty Simpson was amazing. First-round pick last year. And right now it's a live competition between Austin Mack and Keelan Russell. And if you look at those guys, I mean, Keelan Russell was the number 2 quarterback in the country just a couple years ago. And Mack, he's in his 4th year in the system. And a lot of people say, well, he might be the smartest guy on the team as far as understanding the offense and the terminology. He was also the first quarterback off the bench when Ty Simpson got banged up in the Rose Bowl last year. So he entered the offseason in front, and then spring happened. And Keelan Russell really closed that gap. He went for an impressive performance in their spring game. Mack was a little banged up. So there's been some smoke out of Tuscaloosa since saying that Russell didn't just close the gap, but maybe in some cases have passed him. Well, I don't know if I agree with that. Not at this point, but the timing detail matters. Last year, Kalen DeBoer named Ty Simpson the starter on August 11th. That was right after the first scrimmage of fall camp. And he's already said this year that he thinks that this might go beyond the second scrimmage. In an ideal world, a guy separates, he's named the guy after that second scrimmage. You start focusing on week 1, 2, and 3 opponents. That might not be the case. So this may be settled here sooner than later, but it could draw out a little bit. But here's the other thing. Whichever one they go with, I think they're going to be just fine at quarterback. A lot of things around Alabama, there are question marks for sure. Quarterback for me is not one of them. I think quarterback, when we fast forward to week 5, 6, 7, 8 in the season, I think that will be a position of strength for the Crimson Tide. And look, you can't play quarterback by yourself. You bring back Ryan Coleman-Williams, and while he might be on paper the only returning starter that Alabama has on offense, they still have a right guard that played an awful lot but doesn't qualify because he didn't start 6 games. You also have Lottie Brooks as the slot receiver. He played a lot but didn't start, so he doesn't qualify as well. But there is a lot of news surrounding the offense that might be good because the offensive line really underachieved throughout last season. So a bunch of new faces up front could actually make this group jump significantly. What's also beneficial is that Ryan Grubb is in year number 2 running the offense. Kane Womack is back running the defense for the 3rd straight year. So first year, maybe installing, adjusting, getting to know their personnel. Now it feels like there's decent coaching continuity in the defensive line based on what we've heard in fall camp. That might be the biggest surprise. They went to the portal. They go get Devin Tompkins from SC. They get Terrence Green from Oregon. You get Kendrick Billing-Jones from Mississippi State. These are 3 veteran interior players in one off season. So they feel like the depth along the defensive line is really good. They're also saying this might be the most versatile defensive line of the DeBoer era. And on the offensive line, we've talked about Michael Carroll, William Sanders, and Jackson Lloyd. Those guys look like they're in a really good spot there at guard and tackle, respectively. But don't rule out Mal Waldrop. Rayson Delgado's at centers, a bigger frame, but still athletic, much like the guy Parker Brailsford they lost last year. And Javen James appears to be sliding in at right tackle. So those pieces are starting to settle. And there is a ton of talent on both lines of scrimmage. It's just, can they play well together? You have an edge rusher in Yanze Pierre that can take over the game, and you have one of the best secondaries in the country. So are there concerns beyond the quarterback and maybe some new pieces? Of course. There's a running back room that feels like it's 5 deep, but it's certainly unsettled. The wide receiver room is really young, and yet it's really thin as well. But the roster feels loaded. However, we keep going back to that one word, young. And young is not necessarily a synonym for bad. It's just a synonym for volatile. And I think Alabama this year has a chance to be last year's version of Oregon, a team where everybody said, hey, 26 is the year. Fast forward, next year's the year. And then they go on and win 11 games because they have really, really good talent. Now, the projections land them around 8-4. And there is a legitimate playoff path, though, because the schedule is more manageable than some of the teams that sit right behind them and some of the teams that sit right in front of them. Yes, Alabama on paper plays the 15th hardest schedule in America, which sounds really, really difficult. But you look at what Oklahoma plays, that's the 2nd. You look at Texas, they play the 3rd. A&M plays the 9th. So of every serious SEC national championship contender, Alabama might have drawn the most manageable road. And that's worth something when you fast forward to November. So the concern is not talent. It's not coaching. It's a team that's really young at a lot of different spots, all coming together at once. And believe me, 8th is kind of trusting the roster and the schedule and waiting on the experience to catch up. But if they can settle on the quarterback job here very soon, then this ranking is probably going to feel about right. But if this competition is ongoing, or maybe they have to make a switch, that's something that could become problematic. So there's not a lot of middle ground right now with a team that's this talented and unsettled at one position that could very well decide everything. But I am more optimistic about Alabama than just about anybody else in the national media. We'll go next to the number 7 Texas Longhorns. And people are going to say, whoa, 7? Hear me out for a second. All right, they're 7th on my board. The coaches poll has them 4th. So, yeah, it's not like it's a massive gap. But let's start with the thing that everybody's already forgotten, right? Like, they missed the playoff last year, and their 10-win team still had a good bowl performance. But what did Steve Sarkisian do about last year's shortcomings? Well, he rebuilt and added and I think upgraded in several spots. You go out, you get Will Muschamp, who comes over to run the defense, replacing Pete Kwiatkowski. You also get Cam Coleman in from Auburn, who is going to do an amazing job, likely at the isolated X spot at wide receiver. It will take some of the pressure off Ryan Wingo and the rest of what should be a really deep receiver room. It might be the second best receiver room in the country behind Ohio State. You also look at the running back spot. They now have a lot of juice at running back with Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers. Those guys are home run hitters coming out of the backfield, and the transfer class was exceptional. They return a lot of starting quality, and I love their quarterback. I mean, Arch Manning's back, and he's locked in. It sounds like he's very, very sharp. And yeah, sometimes a guy that didn't go through full spring practice, maybe there's an adjustment period for him. Well, it doesn't sound like that was the case for Arch Manning here early in camp. Because if you look at what was the problem for Arch last year, people blamed him. I looked well beyond that. I looked at the protection, and that was an issue. I looked at the challenges they had consistently running the football. And if you look at the Sarkisian era, I mean, last year was low marks in total rushing yards and rushing yards per game and yards per carry. All three were program lows for this staff. So that's not necessarily a quarterback problem. That's a line of scrimmage problem. And it's being repaired right now, and hopefully will be a position of strength because the upside is certainly there. Trevor Gooseby will lock down a spot. Sounds like Baker is going to be sliding over to guard. Connor Robinson should be very, very steady at center. So there's 3 spots locked down, but there's still 2 that are very much open for competition. And the biggest issue for Texas last year was the red zone. They got to the red zone 47 times. They came away with 30 touchdowns, 10 field goals, and 7 trips where they got absolutely nothing. That's a touchdown on just 63% of their trips. That was 49th in college football. And you're going to say, well, 49th, that's not terrible. Well, 5 of the 12 teams that made the playoff last year finished in the top 25 in red zone touchdown percentage. Indiana, the team that won the whole thing, they were 12th. They scored touchdowns on 73% of their drives. Texas was 49th. And that's the difference between a team that's 10-3 watching in December and 12-1 hosting a first-round playoff game or getting a first-round bye. You turn 4 of those field goals into touchdowns, and we're talking about a completely different conversation, especially when you look at Ohio State last year where 2 trips to the red zone came up empty-handed. It's not necessarily a talent problem down there because Texas has the wide receivers, and now adding Can Coleman to take some of the pressure off in the red zone, just, hey, throw a jump ball. That's going to be really beneficial. But they're going to need to be physical inside the 10-yard line, and that goes back to the emphasis on the run game and the improvement that is hopefully scheduled for the offensive line. Speaking of schedule, it's a really hard slate. Texas plays arguably the top 3 toughest schedule in America. Okay, you look at Texas and Oklahoma 2, Texas 3. Those 2 programs sit at 10 and 7 on my board. And if they had a normal path, they'd be at least 3 or 4 spots higher. Now, I think Arch Manning is going to be excellent this year. I also think last preseason, the entire industry got way ahead on the offensive line. And I'm not going to make the same mistake in consecutive Augusts, right? They're 7th right now with one of the top schedules in America, means that we're going to have to see this thing play out. The ceiling is as high as anybody, but I want to see the offensive line show continuity, and I want to see an improvement from a run game standpoint. If they can prove those things, I think Texas will quickly re-enter the top 5, potentially even the top 3 at some point in the month of September. At number 6, it's the Georgia Bulldogs. Look, they went 12-2. They won their 2nd straight SEC championship, which makes Kirby Smart's program kind of the most boringly elite operation in the sport. I mean, I understand first-round exits. That's not the norm. That's not the expectation. But who has a higher floor than Georgia? I mean, seriously, they are that good and they are that consistent. And Gunnar Stockton is back, went 12-2 in his first season as a full-time starter. They returned a lot of quality pieces that started a bunch of games last year. They're 5th nationally in returning snaps. I also love what they have in the backfield. I think Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens, that's a really solid piece. Frazier and tight end Lawson Lucky, both those guys were all SEC caliber players last year. They also have a bunch of all SEC caliber players kind of all throughout the offense, and they still have Mike Bobo calling the plays. Now, some people will cringe at that idea. I think Mike Bobo does an excellent job. And we also know that the defense will certainly be one of the best in college football again. They always are. But why are they 6th right now? And what's interesting, I think, about Georgia is that Georgia's entire offensive goal for 2026 is to be more explosive. That's not me projecting. That is the stated organizing principle of the entire offseason, and you can see exactly why. Georgia averaged 32 points a game last year. It was 6th in the SEC. But with this roster, and yes, they were super efficient. Yes, they were very physical. They never really scared teams down the field. And Kirby Smart, in watching his offense, he's thinking, man, the way we run the ball, we should be able to go heavy play action, hit big shots all the time. Well, I think that's the point of emphasis this year, and I feel very optimistic they have got that addressed here this year as well. Here's the problem. They did lose 4 of their 5 receivers who caught more than 10 passes last season. So Zachariah Branch, Dylan Bell, Colby Young, Noah Thomas, those guys are all gone. London Humphreys is the only receiver back who caught more than 15 balls, and he's always worked best as kind of a complementary piece rather than a guy that the defense will have to adjust to. So they went to the portal and they go and get Isaiah Canyon out of Georgia Tech. And he was held out most of spring with a bit of an ankle injury, but he's a guy that you can expect big things from. So Georgia, who wants to be more explosive, and to do it, they're betting on Taylor Taylor, who's a 5-star young player, lost most of his first year to an injury. They also have Landon Rolden and Sakovi White-Helton, several really good pieces. But it's a group that there are some unknowns about. I think the talent is there. It's just the experience is not. So you're trying to add some vertical juice with a relatively inexperienced wide receiver room, maybe the most inexperienced wide receiver room Georgia's had in a decade. And if you look at Branch last year, the guy who they lost, he was explosive, but most of his damage was done after the catch rather than stretching the field and getting behind the defense. So the thing that Georgia is chasing is not necessarily something they had and lost. It's something they haven't really had since Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey were on campus. And if you listen to Kirby Smart, his own framing is always about grit, right? Finding out what the team has to do to win those fourth quarter battles. And that's a head coach telling you he already knows exactly what this team is going to need, what buttons to press to get them to their ceiling. Now, the schedule is manageable, relatively speaking. And it's meaningfully gentler than what Texas and Oklahoma have to deal with. Now, the projections have Georgia around 10-2. So 6th is me saying that Georgia has the highest floor in college football, and the ceiling depends almost entirely on some 19-year-old wide receivers becoming huge problems for people in October. So no one will be shocked, self included, when Georgia wins 10 games. But I also think, too, the ceiling is something that needs to be proven this year with a more explosive offense. That's why they're 6th, and I don't have them 3rd at this point, but still very optimistic they can take the steps necessary to become a national championship contender yet again. At number 5, it's the Miami Hurricanes. And Miami played for the national championship last year. They lost that game at home, but still, man, 13-3, pretty remarkable season. So sit on that for a second. You get to the final, you host it, you lose by 6 to what was a generationally elite team in Indiana. Very impressed with what Mario Cristobal did. But the quarterback story is the same as it always is. He's going to start a transfer quarterback for the 3rd consecutive season. It was Cam Ward, then it was Carson Beck. Now it's Darian Mensah. He transfers in from Duke. And Mensah's not just some, I hope this guy works out. Well, he led the entire Power 4 last year in passing yards with nearly 4,000 passing yards. So this is a really productive passer and has done an amazing job and will now be stepping into a program that has better skill around him, better offensive line around him more than likely, and an offense that has seen 2 guys get drafted in the last 2 years. One of those 2 guys was the number 1 overall pick. So who is he going to be throwing to? Well, Malachi Tony's a pretty good starting point. He's back, and he might be pound for pound the best player in college football, and was a sophomore as a freshman last year. Now he's moving into his sophomore year. But this is going to be amazing to see the progress he makes because he can run it, he can throw it, he can catch it underneath, he can catch out of the slot. I want to see him now continuing to expound on his own versatility. So what he does in a one-on-one situation is going to be amazing. And him paired with a guy that's as talented as Mensah, that's going to be unique to watch throughout this season. So Miami last year, though, when we're evaluating them, their star at least to me. Well, at least in the playoffs. They won a first-round playoff game on the road at Kyle Field. That was impressive, right? They beat Ohio State. They beat Ole Miss. Those were all incredible. So 3 playoff wins. 2 of those wins against teams that are currently ranked in my top 11, and yet they're still having to watch someone celebrate on the field. Well, the question might be along the offensive line. We'll get to that in just a minute. We know Shannon Dawson's back running the offense. Corey Heatherman is back running the defense. And if you look at Mensa in Dawson's offense, I really like how this marriage could work out, because Dawson's going to morph the offense around the quarterback rather than the other way around. Hey, square peg, round hole. Nope. I'm going to mold it to how you feel and what you do best. You also have Mark Fletcher back at running back. They go out and they get Cooper Barkate, who is one of the most coveted receivers in the portal, who just so happened to be Darian Mensa's teammate at Duke. So the quarterback didn't arrive alone. He brought a target with him. They also go out and get a legitimate difference maker, a defensive end, in Damon Wilson, the edge rusher out of Missouri. But it's the offensive line that I'm paying very close attention to, and it's being rebuilt around a lot of new faces. But Miami brings back 12 starters. They're favored to win the ACC. And if you listen to Mario Cristobal at Media Day, said that this season will be earned, not inherited. Right now, the schedule, they're 45th hardest in the country. That's the most gettable path of anybody inside the top 8 for the most part. And the projections had them around 10-2. Feels almost a little bit light. Now, the one game that settles it might be on November 7th. That's when they go to South Bend and play a team that I'll talk about here in just a moment. So why is Miami 5th and not 3rd? Well, it's not the quarterback. It's kind of what's in front of them. The offensive line, to me, last year was the star, and Miami has to replace that quality. And they're building it around some quality pieces, some guys that are really good. So the new quarterback behind a new line is the oldest problem in football. But if there's one coach in America that I trust to build an elite offensive line, it might be Mario Cristobal. That is his entire professional identity, and he has earned the benefit of the doubt. But the transfer quarterback model has now worked twice in a row, and twice in a row is a track record, not necessarily a guarantee. So every single year, Miami has to rebuild the most important relationship on the football team. It's the one between the quarterback and everybody else from scratch in August with a guy that hasn't done it before, but they've done it beautifully twice. So it's genuinely impressive, the roster construction. So 5th is me respecting that completely and wanting to see the handoff work one more time before I put them in front of the 4 teams that sit right in front of them. But I think Miami has a chance to be right back where they were a year ago, assuming the offensive line doesn't fall off a cliff, which I don't think is ever going to happen, at least not on Mario Cristobal's watch. At number 4, it's the Oregon Ducks. And if you look at Dante Moore last year, he was projected as one of the top draft picks in the 2026 draft, and he decides to come back. And it might be the most consequential roster decision of the entire offseason, and it didn't involve a courtroom. So that's big, right? So what did he do last year? Well, he goes for over 3,500, 3-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, gets 13 wins in his first full season as the starting quarterback. He goes into the summer sitting in the top 5 in the Heisman market behind really CJ Carr and Arch Manning. So what did he come back for? Well, Oregon's season ended in disappointment there in the Peach Bowl. In the playoff semifinal against Indiana, it was not a competitive football game. And it was the second year in a row that happened. The year before, it was Ohio State that knocked Oregon out of the playoff in convincing fashion there in the Rose Bowl. So those 2 elimination games together, and Oregon has been outscored 97-43 in the games that ended the last 2 seasons. So that's the distance between being elite and a champion, right? And Dan Lanning, he's 48-8 at Oregon, but now it's about closing it. Now it's about getting it done. And Moore's last start was a multi-turnover afternoon in that Indiana game. And his own words afterward, they didn't play very well. They kind of beat themselves. And he has every reason to just go to the NFL and say, yeah, well, I did my best. Next man's chance. Well, instead he came back and he said, I'm going to fix it. That's what he's going to do. And I do think it's important to appreciate just how rare that's become. But the headline on this team might be the defensive line. And Oregon brought back all 4 starters along their defensive front. You bring back Amari Washington, who's a takeover defensive tackle. You get Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, who I think Tuioti is amazing. Right? All 3 of those guys were all Big Ten. All three announced they're coming back, and Bear Alexander had already said that he was coming back a month earlier. So if you look at where things are from a defensive standpoint, just talk about Washington for a moment. I mean, he's one of the best and will tip passes, and he might have had his name called in the first round had he decided to come out as well. So it's very rare to have a defensive front that comes back in their entirety, especially when you have pieces with this type of talent ceiling. Now, the rest of it, they have 14 starters back. They are 15th nationally in returning snaps. They also bring in Dylan Raiola from Nebraska to be the backup to Dante Moore. Evan Stewart's back at wide receiver. He missed all of last year, and it sounded like he's more explosive now than he's ever been before. Now, there is a bit of a question mark about the coordinators. They did lose both. Will Stein left to become the head coach at Kentucky. Tosh Lupoy left to take over at Cal, his alma mater. So you do lose your offensive play caller and your defensive play caller in the same winter, and normally you'd think, oh, they're going to get punished for that. Except Dan Lanning decides to promote both replacements from inside the building. Drew Mehringer takes over on offense. He was already co-coordinator, and that was a terrific group. That was 10th most points in the country scored last year. You also have Chris Hampton on defense, who was already a co-coordinator and has been in the building since 2023. He's also one of the best recruiters in America. So I said this about SMU in the show the other day, and I'll say it again here. 2 new titles, but not 2 new schemes. So why are they 4th, but the coaches have them 2nd? Because of 56-22. That's why. I mean, you'll see in a moment, you'll see who I have 3rd. And the last time the team that is going to be 3rd and the team that is currently 4th in Oregon, last time they played with everything on the line, it was not a competitive game. So I'm not necessarily ranking a team above a program that beat it by 30 plus in a semifinal until I see something different. So if you look at the projections, Oregon comfortably probably around 10-2. They play the 26th hardest schedule in America. So 4th is not a criticism. 4th is telling me right now that the top of the sport is stacked. And unfortunately, someone has to sit here. But if Dante Moore plays the way he did for the 13 games prior to the semifinal, this ranking will age badly. And I want to be the first to say so. Big believer in Oregon. This could absolutely be their year. At number 3, it's the Indiana Hoosiers. They went 16-0. They won the national championship. They beat 6 top 10 teams by a combined score of 227-86. Fernando Mendoza won Indiana's first Heisman Trophy and scored that incredible diving touchdown that won the title game in Miami on Miami's field. And I have them 3rd. Why 3rd, right? Because of an enormous amount that is now in the NFL. Mendoza's gone. So is Omar Cooper, Elijah Surratt, Roman Hemby, Kalen Black, Riley Nowakowski, Pat Coogan. An offense that went 16-0 is substantially not the offense that will show up this September. And this is just true. I'm not going to try to talk around it, but they're still 3rd, right? They're not 12th because Curt Cignetti, he kept his entire coaching staff. He kept every coordinator. He kept everybody. And you get 60-plus players back. You bring back the Big Ten's offensive lineman of the year in Carter Smith. You bring back 2 difference-making linebackers in Elijah Hardy and Isaiah Jones. You also have Tyreek Tucker up front along the defensive line. You bring back wide receiver Charlie Becker. So if you look at Hardy, Tucker, and Becker, those guys all earned preseason All-Big Ten honors. And Smith and Tucker are both on the Outland Trophy watch list. And right before camp opened, the rich get richer. Stephen Daly, he announces he's returning for a 5th year along that defensive front. That's not just a depth piece. Daly finished 3rd in the entire country last year in tackles for loss, and he did it in 13 games because he got hurt celebrating the Big Ten championship. Well, he's back on the practice field, and Cignetti says that he would have been cleared for camp. I mean, he's going to be good to go. Jamari Sharp is back at corner. He sealed the national championship game with an interception against Miami, and they also went shopping. That's what Curt Cignetti's done the last couple of years. Goes out and gets Nick Marsh, the receiver out of Michigan State. He gets Toby Osunsanmi and Chidi Obiazor off the edge. Sorry, I say those slow because back-to-back is tricky, right? Turbo Richard's in at running back. Joe Bruner along the offensive line. And the quarterback, that might be one of the best stories, right? Josh Hoover comes in from TCU, where he finished 2nd in the entire country among FBS quarterbacks in passing yards per game last year. Now, he is Cignetti's 3rd straight starting quarterback that was acquired through the portal. And at this point, that's an operating system. That's not strategy. But there is a bit of a concern with Hoover joining the Hoosiers. He threw 33 interceptions over the course of 3 years as TCU starter. That's the third most in the country over that stretch. 13 of them came last season alone. He had 5 different multi-interception games. So the guy replacing a Heisman winner does have a real history of throwing the ball to the other team. And Curt Cignetti is not a man that tolerates that. But here's what I'll tell you where I'm optimistic. I'm really optimistic because if you look at Hoover and his active career passing yards, he leads the sport, and he's walking into the best supporting cast he's ever had. At TCU, he was often the reason why the offense functioned, and the quarterback had to force it from time to time, and it led to occasional picks. Well, he doesn't have to force anything in Bloomington. Here's the part that everybody knows. Indiana actually recruited Josh Hoover out of high school. That was in 2021. That was well before Curt Cignetti ever arrived. He backed off that commitment. He goes to TCU instead. And here we are, 5 years later. The quarterback who decided to go elsewhere walks into Bloomington and is going to be leading the defending national champions. So, the sport does not write things that neatly very often. Now, I've said it on this show, and I'm not ready to write off a repeat. I'm not. I'm still not. Third is not necessarily a demotion. Third is what happens when you lose a Heisman winner and half your offense, and yet you're still this good. I would say it's more of a feather in the cap of Curt Cignetti. It's a trust of their process with what Bryant Haynes does defensively, what Mike Shanahan does offensively, and what Curt Cignetti does from a roster building standpoint. I don't think Indiana skips a beat this year. They'll be very, very good again and will yet again compete for a national championship. At number 2, it's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, tons of returning production, right? They return more snaps than anybody in America. They get back nearly 2/3 of their snaps. You bring back 14 starters. They're one of only 4 programs in the entire sport returning 17 or more players who started football games for them last year. You get the head coach back, offensive coordinators back, defensive coordinators back, starting quarterbacks back. Pretty good spot. A perfect sheet in all 4 boxes. Pair that with the number 1 returning snap count in America, and you're going to be cooking with gas. Look, the quarterback, CJ Carr, he's back for his redshirt sophomore season. Same system, same quarterback, second year of it. And the reports out of fall camp is then they've been about as good as they get. Take everything you read about fall camp write-ups, take it with a grain of salt. I'll believe this one because I've seen it. And Mike Denbrock, who runs that offense, he says the staff is now very comfortable letting Carr kind of steer the ship whenever possible, which is very different than what we heard last year. Last year, they're like, all right, let's kind of coach around him and let him rise to the occasion as the season goes along. Now it's like, hey, CJ, it's your show. Here's the keys. We trust you. Go do your thing. And if you listen to Denbrock, he also said the offense is actually a lot further ahead today than it was at this point last August. That's a pretty good spot to be. Jaden Greathouse is full go at wide receiver, no limitations whatsoever, which is the one health question they had walking into camp. And the only job that might be open at this point is the right guard spot. And Denbrock said they might not know that until the second or third week of fall camp because there are a couple guys that are trying to get back from injury. On defense, that's what's frightening about this group. Drake Bowen back, Jalen Sneed back, both play linebacker. Boubacar Traore is amazing coming off the edge. You get a couple lockdown guys in Christian Gray and Leonard Moore at corner. You get a Don Schuler back at safety. So you get 6 guys that have already been elite for multiple years in some cases, and every one of those guys has a chance to take over the game. Now, Chris Ash, there was a bit of a learning curve early in his tenure last year. And as he got more comfortable and confident with his own personnel, you started to see things change. You started to see things take hold. And the multiplicity that they can play with now, playing man or zone, will be beneficial as they continue to move forward. And if you listen to how he described standard camp in 6 words, he said, we want 5 to 6 seconds of hell. Well, that's pretty good. You get 11 players operating with speed and violence. Well, it seems like a pretty good install to me. Now, here's why it all matters this particular year. Because last year, Notre Dame went 10-2. They did not make the college football playoff. A 10-2 Notre Dame team ranked inside the top 10, sat at home, and watched 12 other teams compete for the national championship. Now, under the format, if they finish in the top 12, they're automatically in because there have been some tweaks from last year. Last year, they just landed on the wrong side of that line, and it cost them everything. And that's the entire 2026 season for this program in one sentence. And every single player in that building knows it. Now, the argument against my own pick, because I promised you Monday that I would make it before somebody else did, Notre Dame plays the 56th hardest schedule in America. Only two opponents right now are ranked in the preseason polls. That's BYU and Miami. The projections have them finishing better than 10-2, 11-1, frankly, if we're going to round some numbers. So let me be direct about what I'm claiming here and what I'm not. I'm not saying that Notre Dame has an impossible task with the 12 games they have in the regular season. They have arguably the most manageable road of anybody in the top 10, top 15, top 20. And part of it is because they're that good. But here's the sharp edge of it, which really could make the whole season for them. Can Notre Dame survive 2 losses? Probably not. Like, they went 10-2 last year and the committee left them out. So with the schedule that's ranked 56th and only 2 ranked opponents on it right now, a second loss doesn't necessarily cost them a seed. It might cost them entry all the way because there's nothing really left on the slate that might be impressive enough to argue their way back in. Doesn't mean that SMU can't be ranked. Some teams could overachieve for sure, but Notre Dame is going to need to take care of business. So here's what I'm saying. Anything worse than 11-1 should be a relative disappointment for this football team. Not because the schedule is soft, but because the roster is that good. Everybody back. The defense, you can make a case, is the best in the country. The quarterback is in year number 2. Same offense, same play caller. You get back nearly 2/3 of your snap from a year ago. This is a top 5, top 6 roster at worst in all of college football. And when that happens, 11 wins is the floor. That's the expectation for the Fighting Irish for me this year. And every single source you look at has Notre Dame in the top 5. I have them second. And the only reason why I don't have them first is because of the talent profile of the team that's sitting right in front of them. But I love the Irish. And I think the Irish this year, they're going to be there at the very end. It's just whether or not they can finish, unlike they were able to do just a couple years ago. At number 1, it's the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I said it on the show months ago, and nothing has moved me off of it. Now, the coaches poll agrees. They got 38 of 72 first-place votes. It's the first time that Ohio State has opened a season number 1 in that poll since 2015, partly because they have 2 Heisman candidates. It's a pretty good spot to start. Julian Sayin is back after throwing for over 3,600 yards, completed 77% of his passes, en route to becoming a Heisman finalist. 77% as a first-year starter. You also get Jeremiah Smith back at wide receiver. And I want to give you his numbers in context because the number alone just undersells it. He caught 87 passes for over 1,200 yards last year and 12 touchdowns. That was 4th in America in receiving yards, 4th in yards per catch, 6th in touchdowns, and 7th in receptions. He led Ohio State in catches, yards, and touchdowns, which he's done every single year since he's been here. And you think about what he did as a true freshman, it was absurd. So he's been the alpha in that room since the day he arrived. But here's what's different about 2026. Every year that Smith has played, there have been another first-round receiver on the opposite side of the formation, whether it was Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate. Both those guys are gone. Both went in the first round. So for the first time in his career, a defense could build their entire game plan around Jeremiah Smith and ignore what else is there. But guess what? There's plenty there. There is plenty there beyond Jeremiah Smith. And frankly, even if you double him, does it matter? I mean, here's the number I actually care about. In 6 career postseason games, every single one of them against a top 10 opponent, Smith has 34 catches for 682 and 20 yards a catch with 6 touchdowns. The better the opponent, the better he is. That's the rarest thing a receiver can be. And he's within striking distance of the career receiving records at Ohio State, and that's widely expected to be his last season there. So the offense, how much will it change? So here's part of the number that will explain a bit of the offseason in Columbus. Ohio State scored just 24 points in their last 2 games. They scored 10 against Indiana. They scored 14 against Miami. They were one of the highest scoring offenses in America, and it wasn't very good in the final 2 outings. Now, the mechanism was not necessarily mysterious. In those 2 games, Ohio State's offensive line gave up 10 sacks and 16 tackles for loss. They didn't necessarily get out-schemed. They just got beaten at the line of scrimmage twice in a row with the season on the line. Now, Ryan Day didn't fire anybody over it. Brian Hartline went to become the head coach at USF, which he earned. But if you look at what Ryan Day chose to replace him with, it was Arthur Smith, who has spent years designing offenses in the NFL. And his teams have always been built on a very physical run game and play action passing. Look, they have the spread passing attack down. They're good there. But can they control the line of scrimmage? Can the offensive line play better? I mean, Ryan Day, he had his pick of coordinators, and he hired the guy whose identity is running the football and hitting you on play action off of it. That's not an accident. 8 months after your season ended because you struggled blocking the front, well, that hopefully gets addressed with the hire of Arthur Smith. The running back situation has been one of the bigger surprises in camp. Look, Bo Jackson went for over 1,000 yards last year, had 6 touchdowns, had 6.1 per carry as a true freshman. I think a lot of people assumed it was his job. Well, right now, he's not the starter. So far early in fall camp, it's actually been Isaiah West, who's been taking a majority of the first team reps in the first few practices. You also have Jacoby Jackson, who's been mixed in there alongside Jackson as well. So context matters. Jackson got a little banged up in his freshman year, had off-season surgery, missed some spring ball. West, though, they think he's got a chance to be really good. And Ryan Day has already said, man, he had one of the best off seasons in the entire building. So this is Ohio State that's easing a 1,000-yard running back into camp, or maybe it's a genuine competition. I kind of lean towards the latter because I think this Isaiah West kid might be legitimate. And by the time we fast forward, if it's Isaiah West, Bo Jackson, Jacoby's in there as well, you could have a 3-deep committee that can be as good as anybody. Now up front, you get 4 of 5 offensive line starters back, and a bunch of them are on the Outland Trophy watch list. Now, the offensive line matters maybe more than anything else on the entire roster, is you got to keep Julian Sand upright, which was a huge problem there in the final 2 games of the season. And Sand actually spent most of the offseason working on his scrambling, which was the one very obvious hole in his game. If he can keep defenses honest with his legs, that unlocks a whole nother dimension of what this offense could potentially become. Now, on the defensive side, this is something I'm really excited about. And you have to replace a lot of really good pieces. I mean, they were the number 1 defense in America last year. I mean, number 1. You know, they led the country in yards allowed, had just under 220 a game. They led the country in scoring defense. They gave up just over 9 points a game. Well, 7 of their 11 players off that defense were drafted. You had 3 guys go in the top 11 with Caleb Downs, Arvell Reese, and Sonny Styles. Now, Matt Patricia, they went to the portal. They reloaded on the interior. You still have elite defensive line coaching. And I think with Larry Johnson there, you're always going to feel good about that group. But you still have 7 high-level, elite caliber starters gone is a problem, for sure. And if Ohio State loses a game it does not expect to lose this fall, it's probably going to be because maybe they weren't able to adequately replace some of those key defenders that could take over the game throughout last season. But they're number 1. They're number 1. They play the 8th hardest schedule in America. Notre Dame is number 2. They play the 56th hardest schedule in America. And if you look at Ohio State, they have the hardest slate of anybody in my top 6 outside of Texas. So they're not the safest pick on planet Earth, but they are the pick with the most chances to potentially be wrong and still not wrong. So the projections give Ohio State the best national championship odds in the country by a comfortable margin and the best chance of anybody to reach the playoff. That's because the talent profile across the board is off the charts. Wide receivers are elite, quarterbacks elite, running back depth is elite, offensive line is experienced. Hopefully for the Buckeyes, they can be elite. And then defensively, I just can't bet against them. They're that good. And I think Matt Patricia was that good in his first year there in Columbus. Look, Ohio State went 12-2, both those losses at the end of the year. The 2 teams that beat Ohio State last year, they're sitting at 3rd and 5th on my list. That's not a coincidence, and certainly not an indictment. It's a photograph at the top of the sport. But Ohio State is number 1 because they have the quarterback, the best receiver in America, a play caller that will be committed to making sure the offensive line plays up to their potential. And even though they have one of the hardest schedules of just about anybody in the top, I don't think there's any excuse. The Buckeyes will be there at the end. They are every year because of how good they are throughout their roster and how talented they are at key positions that help you win championships. Before we get you out of here, I want to give you 3 things that I believe. Number 1, I believe Josh Hoover is going to be in the Heisman mix at season's end. Look, the guy was second in America in passing yards per game last year with a program that had a fraction of the talent and the continuity that will be around him this year. So you put that arm behind the reigning Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year, an ability to run the football, take pressure off the passing game, and some dynamic weapons at wide receiver. I don't think Josh Hoover skips a beat. I think he'll finish in the top 10 in the Heisman votes. It wouldn't even surprise me if he made it to New York as a Heisman finalist. Number 2, I think Notre Dame goes 11-1, maybe better. And I've said it now. I'll say it as a prediction. You get that much production back. You get the number 1 production returning in the country. That defense, 11 wins is the floor. I happen to think it could be even better than that. They'll be favored in every single game, and they'll be favored by a comfortable margin. And number 3, Oklahoma's going to make the playoff anyway. But we can talk about the second hardest schedule in the country and how it could cost them a handful of games. But if you look at what Oklahoma might be, even at 9-3, against a 10-2 team that maybe doesn't have those marquee wins, I think you're going to really like what the Sooners will pull off. Of course, it depends on who they beat, what they do in the losses. Are they competitive in the losses? Are they healthy? All those things factor in. But I still think Oklahoma, regardless of how difficult their schedule is, they're going to be there in the 12-team playoff at season's end. Look, we know the top 10 is tricky. Every single year, we put together a top 10, and someone in that top 10, at least one, maybe two, they won't be ranked by season's end. Who's it going to be this year? We will find out. Last year, it was Clemson and Penn State. Both were in a free fall there early in the season. Will one of these 10 teams disappoint? It'll be fascinating to watch. We really appreciate you being with us, as always. We appreciate y'all coming to the new studio. It's fun to unveil it on a game and on a show that is this significant. We always encourage you to go download the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. If you want to leave a rating, you want to leave a review, by all means, go ahead and do that. You can also check us out on the ESPN College Football YouTube page. And we'll leave you with this. We oftentimes get told that we have some SEC bias or we love the SEC. Just so you know, we have 0 teams from the SEC ranked in our top 5. Just want to leave you with that. It's a tip of the cap to how good Miami's become, the 3 Big Ten teams, and of course what Notre Dame brings back this season as well. So for all of us here at ACF, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.